title of his talk is Termination in Concurrency. So please.
Thank you very much. Let me see, yeah. So this talk is called Termination in Concurrency. So we are interested in concurrency and also in termination, and termination in the standard sense. So this is joint work with my fantastic collaborators, Paulus. He's my PhD student. He just graduated. He just finished his thesis.
I'm sorry, I will have to interrupt. Please speak into the mic. We're not speaking anything.
Okay. So as I was saying, this is joint work with Joseph, who is my PhD student, and with Daniele, and she's a postdoc in Imperial at the moment. So let me see how I can. Good. So, well, this is about termination. I think that most people, or at least most of us, will be interested in termination, right? Any programmer will be interested in termination. We know what termination means. So, in general, a term is terminating if its all reduction sequences are finite, right? So, this is a central cornerstone of sequential programming models. You can think, for instance, of all the different works in rewriting systems about termination. So, this is really, really fundamental. And it turns out that it's also important in concurrency, right? So concurrency is, of course, the possibility of being able to exploit infinite behaviors, or the possibility of having some continuous interaction with an environment. But at the end of the day, what we would like is to have termination in the sense of internal computations being terminating. You would like systems in general just to be reactive all the time with its environment. But in principle, what we would like to have is ultimately to have a terminating basis, right? So in general, what we would like is to have processes, right, in the sense of process calculi, processes which have infinite sequences of observable actions. So we always see that they are reactive, that they are able to produce actions, but these actions somehow are intertwined with finite sequences of internal computations, right? So termination is really important in concurrency, and it is really not a new observation, right? And in a way, our work has to do with a line of work that was very, very active 20 years ago. So in a way, we feel like archaeologists of formal models and formal theories. So we are concerned with termination of pi calculus processes. And this is a very interesting problem because pi calculus is very expressive, right? So you can do many things, including infinite behaviors. Right, so one particular source of infinite behaviors is the idea of servers and clients expressed in the pi calculus, right? So this is a tiny example of what we call this ping-pong pattern, right? So in the level, so you have, oh, well, I cannot point this thing. Oh wait, probably can just do something like this. Oh yeah. So here you have. Sorry, I'm a bit clumsy with this. So the idea is you have a server, and this is the exclamation mark. This is what represents the server in the pi calculus. It's something that expects a value and instantiates the body of the server. And you have on the other side of the parallel, the vertical bar, you have a client, right? And then the idea is that this is a process that receives a client and invokes another output action for the next iteration. So this is an infinite sequence of actions. So this is one of the most trivial examples of infinite behaviors in the pi calculus, right? And 20 years ago, as I was saying, so there was this very active line of work on trying to use type systems to enforce termination, right? And the result of that line of research was a very interesting class of papers, each one of them producing very sophisticated solutions to the idea of detecting termination, ensuring termination by typing. And but the question that remains is how do they relate to each other, right? So typically, what you will find at the end of each paper is a short sentence saying, "Oh yeah, we think that this is unrelated to this other paper, which is very interesting," and so on. So you have informal claims, of course, and that's that's better than nothing, right? But we are really interested in making these claims precise and formal, right? So and this is already a problem in itself, right? So going beyond the informal claims and trying to find formal arguments to contrast the different type systems. And our approach to contrast the different type systems is not just to look at the structures that they are inside typing, but actually at the classes of processes that each of these type systems admit at typable, right? So it's sort of an indirect way of looking into things. But I will claim that it's a productive way of looking into things. And in this paper, we focus on the idea of session type concurrency, right? So you have sessions that are actually descriptions of the protocols that different processes are supposed to perform across channels. And this is going to be informing our comparisons, right? So this paper, I will say it's a half of a conceptual approach to comparing type systems and another half of actual results on how we compare type systems. So we have three classes of processes. And the first class, which we call S, with this calligraphic notation, is a very large class of processes that's derived from the type system by Vasconcelos. And this is a very flexible class of type systems. You have recursive types, you have recursion, you have different ways of expressing composition. You can type, so you can admit as typeable non-terminating processes. So depending on who you ask, this is a good thing or a bad thing. But for us, it's perfect because it's a fantastic baseline for comparison. So this is the largest ocean of processes that you can imagine. Okay, so this is our baseline. Then, oh, that looks awful. Then we have a logically motivated class of processes, which is the class of processes that are session typed, but they come from the Kurohauer correspondence between session types and linear logic. Right, and then you have that automatically. You have a number of different properties, including strong normalization, and this comes directly from the Kurohauer foundations, and that's great. And actually, that's our main motivation for looking into this. And then, on the other hand, we have one of the different type systems that were proposed around 20 years ago, which is due to Deng and Sangiorgi. And Deng and Sangiorgi back then essentially tried to transport techniques from the rewriting world into the world of process calculi. So they have a type system that essentially embeds a well-founded measure into typing. And that's the way of actually connecting and avoiding these kind of ping-pong patterns in clients and servers. So we have three classes of processes, right? So the baseline, the logically motivated, the weight motivated. That's why we use this W there, right? But actually framing the comparison is quite tricky because I have mentioned three classes, but ultimately what we have is three different process models, each one of them with a syntax, semantics, different typing rules, right? So what we had to do was a bit of an architecture of how to frame everything in terms of Vasconcelos type system. So actually we're comparing different classes of Vasconcelos type systems, which are induced by means of encodings by the logically motivated class and by the weight motivated class of Sangiorgi and Deng. Right, so we have these three classes. By definition, we know that that the class of sessions, the class S, contains everything. So this, by design, this works that way. And our main results is that the logically motivated class is a strict subclass of what Deng and Sangiorgi can type, right? And that there are, of course, processes, clients and servers typeable in the weight-based approach that are not typed by Kurohauer, right? So Kurohauer comes to form this very, very nice and small class of very correct processes. Okay, so just to elaborate on what you just said, so the class of logically motivated processes can be typeable using the weight-based approach, right? So the key idea in this proof is essentially just to go through the structure of typeable processes and to extract what Sangiorgi and Deng call a weight function, which is like this global ordering of how clients and servers never induce a circular structure, right? And on the other hand, so we show also that there are processes in Deng's and Sangiorgi's type system that are not typeable in the Kurohauer correspondence. So in a way, what this means is that these weight-based approaches or these kind of measures induced by Deng's and Sangiorgi's type system allow to type more server behaviors than the kind of thing that you have very naturally and effortlessly from the linear logic approach. Okay? So I could end my talk here, but I would like to tell you a bit of the details of why these things are actually tricky. Right? I try to use this color convention to talk about the different systems. So this is our baselines for comparison. So this is a subset of a fragment of Vasconcelos type system for sessions, right? So you're not supposed to read all of this. It's just to point out some differences, right? So this is the base class of processes. You have qualifiers to tell that certain things are unrestricted or linear. This appears in processes, so you have this qualified input to say, okay, there is a linear input, or there could be an unrestricted input, which means a server, right? The qualifiers are linear and unrestricted. Then you have session types, and then you have, following this presentation in 2012, you have these pre-types and session types. And of course, you have recursive types. And recursive types are the way in which you will type a client or a server, right? These are the judgments. So we have 3 different type systems. We use these little indices to indicate which system things correspond to. So this is the first class. The second class has to, it comes from Sangiorgi's and Deng's type system, right? Just to be clear, in the beginning, of course, Sangiorgi and Deng, they were not talking at all about session types, at all, right? So these are simple types for the pi calculus. What we did was to adopt their ideas into this kind of session world in order just to make sensible comparisons, right? At some point, you need just to make decisions about how to compare things around. So we designed this process model, PW, and this has to do with inserting or embedding the main principles of Deng and Sangiorgi's type system into a session world so that we could make actually comparisons, right? So processes look different. Here you have that inputs and outputs, they have 2 parameters, and this is in order just to have this continuation, passing, and coding of session types. So this is convenient for technical purposes, doesn't affect termination. Then you have types, which are not session types, they are simple types, so that you only have a type per channel. And you have these little numbers that they call weights, right? And the idea is that you look at the weight of a channel, and then you look at the weights of the output channels, and then you contrast that with respect to the types of the server with the weights of the server types, right? We have a different judgment here. This has this little W to indicate that they are different. So this is our second process model. Our third process model is the one that comes from Curry-Howard, and that's why we call it pi-deal. We have more things because we need actually more elements in order just to frame the different comparisons, right? Once again, we have we have servers as you will expect it. There's nothing special about this. The special thing here is, of course, that we have linear logic propositions that are read as session types, right? So we are really capitalizing on this Curry-Howard correspondence here in order just to identify a class of terminating processes. We have a judgment. The judgment does look different, right? This comes directly from linear logic, right? And this has actually a very important influence on our results, right? Because this judgment essentially says, in this box below, that, well, you have a process P that offers a behavior A along channel X, and does so when composed with processes that offer all the sessions described in gamma and delta. And the distinction is that in gamma and delta, you describe between servers that are, or server behaviors that are described in gamma and linear behaviors that are described in delta. You have this kind of relay guarantee kind of reading, right? And these are the 3 type systems, and actually the intention is to say, well, they are very different, right? So they come from different worlds, and we're just trying to make sense out of all of these differences. Okay, more in detail into the different type systems. The type systems in the baseline comparison class by Vasconcelos. So we have recursion types. So we can have actually some specific class of those recursive types to type the clients and servers that we need for comparisons, right? We do, for technical purposes, we use a set of alternative typing rules which are essentially convenient to type directly clients and servers, but they are completely equivalent, right? Type soundness in this system only ensures type fidelity, the property that well-typed processes follow the intended protocols. There is the example of a typable but non-terminating process. So from their point of view, it's great to type many different things, right? So this is the first type system. This is the type system that comes from Sangiorgi. It looks a bit more complicated. It is not. It's just like the particular inception of those ideas that we're incorporating our rules. It looks a bit hairy. The key idea here is this part, right? So this is the idea in which this is the key element that you will use in order to rule out potential circularities in clients and servers. So this L is a weight function that actually it's everything governing termination, right? The other things are actually very, very, very immediate, at least if you consider simple types for the pi calculus. Here we have no session types, right? The main property enforced by this type system is termination, right? And as you can see, things look and are intrinsically different. Finally, we have the typing rules and the typing judgment from linear logic, right? Here I have just added a couple of typing rules that are related to the interpretation of servers and composition of shared resources according to the Curry-Howard correspondence. Once again, things look very different. Here there is no specific or intentional treatment of termination, everything comes very naturally from the Curry-Howard correspondence, right? And actually, not only termination is enforced, also session fidelity, deadlock freedom, confluence, everything comes for free in a way from logic, right? Great. So, how do we actually frame this comparison? So I have tried to make the point that all things are so different, or what do we do with all these differences? So once again, we take the type system by Vasconcelos as a baseline comparison system here, and we frame all other type systems into that class, right? So in the first line, you have the class S, which is essentially saying, okay, this class contains all the well-typed processes by Vasconcelos. In the class W, we have all the well-typed processes by Vasconcelos, which are also typable according to Sangiorgi's type system, or actually, I should say, to all representation of Sangiorgi's type system using weights, right? And these blue things actually represent encodings. So ways of overcoming the syntactic difference in types and processes, and so as to make everything uniform in terms of Vasconcelos type system. And class L, it's more or less, it's not exactly, formally speaking, it's not exactly what is there, but it's quite close, and it's the same thing, right? So we need to encode things in order to get into Vasconcelos type system. And once there, then we're trying to consider all the processes that are also typed under the linear logical correspondence. So we have two classes of encodings. We have these blue encodings that have to do with sessions into weights and so on, and we have these kind of red encodings that bridge the gap between Vasconcelos type system and the linear logic correspondence. Great. So part of the difficulties in our paper is actually how to live and how to handle all these encodings properly. So we encode processes, we encode types, then we are able to encode judgments, and ultimately we are able to encode the whole derivation. And sometimes we have, and the reason for doing this kind of multi-layer approach is because you need to collect different pieces of information at different places. So sometimes you have information directly on the type, sometimes you have information directly on the type in judgment. But ultimately what we try to get is what I had drawn here. So you have the encoding of a whole derivation, and you try to proceed compositionally on the structure of the rules, right? So this is a specific example from the blue encoding, which bridges the weight system with Vasconcelos system. Something similar but more complicated. It's possible in the red case. So just to give you a flavor of what these encodings look like. So this is the easy encoding. So that's what it fits in the slide. So this is bridging. This is how to encode session types from Vasconcelos, or session type processes by Vasconcelos into the world of the terminating type system by Deng and Sangiorgi, the weight-based system. There is nothing particularly surprising here. What you will see is that sessions are encoded by this continuation passing style. That's what you can see in the encoding, for instance, of the linear input, right? Everything looks more or less compositional as you would like. The encoding of types, it's slightly more interesting because you would like to actually enforce gradually this weight function L that is carrying out all these types and all the weights for the types, right? So here you need a bit of care in order just to propagate the information properly. So you start encoding a whole typing context gamma, and then you pass around this information L, which is something that is not compositional. It's a global piece of information in order to enforce termination, and you pass it around throughout first typing assignments and then the types themselves. Great. So then this is a specific example of the thing I was mentioning before, how you can actually encode judgments once you have put in place proper definitions for encodings of processes and encodings of types. Right? Once again, what you would like to enforce is this kind of thing that is here. This condition is the condition that actually is the key of Sangiorgi's approach for enforcing termination. It's actually quite simple if you think about it. Okay, so the encoding from Sangiorgi's into DIL is actually, or from Sangiorgi's system into linear logic is actually much more interesting, and doesn't fit in the slide, so it's in the paper. But then what you have to check is you have to look into this idea that I pass on very quickly here. So there is some aspect of duality that I have to explain, don't have time to explain here, but essentially here you have the idea that this channel on which things are offered, there is some flipping of how you should interpret that channel. So that's the overbar there is duality in linear logic, right? And the idea, very intuitively, high level idea of the encoding is that you go through the structure of types, And then depending on the inputs and outputs and connections to the server, then you check whether names are bound on free. And this has some subtle consequences on how you treat things, right? So you look at the type, you check whether the type is the thing that you're trying to output is a server or not, whether it's a client or not, and whether you can actually, you don't have enough information to determine things around. Okay? So, so there is a notion of duality once again that is embedded in this thing. Okay, so a tiny example, right? So this is a client-server communication in Vasconcelos type system, which is a reference system once again, right? So this is a client on Y, try to output W as a request to the server on X, right? So we can encode that. So this is the type of the type in reference. And one key idea here is that sometimes we need to, we don't know exactly what's being transmitted, because the type system of Vasconcelos actually is quite expressive and quite flexible. You need to leave certain things open, and that's why this case operator is. Sometimes you don't know exactly what is the name that the server is going to receive. Okay, let me see what else. Okay, so now I don't know how I'm doing with time, Hugo.
You have. Let's say 6 or 7 minutes.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. So then hopefully I give you a bit more of information in order to have a more context on our results. So this is just the repetition of the slide I had before. One thing that I would like to highlight at this point is to say, well, all processes, terminating processes typable with linear logic are typable in Sangiorgi's type systems. So Sangiorgi's type system is more expressive, but proving that actually is quite complicated. And one complication is actually extracting this level function that you need in order to type things in Deng and Sangiorgi's type system. And one reason is because that level function in Sangiorgi's type system operates on bound and free names, right? So it sounds a bit odd if you think about a type system that talks only about free entities. In that type system, you also need to carry on the bound names, and then you need to do a very meticulous scanning of processes in order to compose or to deduce a level function or a weight function from the linear logic thing. So the proof, in our opinion, is interesting. It's quite tricky, but so we didn't expect to find these difficulties at this point, but it's interesting. The other proof that I would like to comment something now, it's actually the counterexample of things that are typable in Deng and Sangiorgi's approach, but not in linear logic, right? So this is the counterexample that you will find in the paper. So process P, essentially you have two things. So you have one thing on the left, which is a linear input on X that receives something called Z, and that process uses Z in order to set up a server, right? So this is what you find on the left. So you have linear input, then you have unrestricted input, right? So you receive something and then you set up a server on the name that you receive. This is already not possible in linear logic. There is this property called locality that forbids you from doing this, and this is naturally and very elegantly induced by the semantics of bank A in linear logic. So the left processes is not typable in linear logic. Also, the right process, the one that is contacting the server, sending something called S along Y, right? That's also not typable in linear logic. And of course, this is a counterexample that we selected on purpose. So there are two things that are of course or evidently outside the world of linear logic. This is a terminating process, right? So you can see or you can actually convince yourself that there are these two reduction steps. It's terminating. This is a process that lives in the class of processes induced by Deng and Sangiorgi's type system, right? So you can come up with a weight function on clients and servers, inputs and outputs, so that everything will be typable in Deng and Sangiorgi's type system, okay? However, as I was saying, this process P, when translated, or up to translation, I should say, is not typable in the linear logic setting, right? So once again, the server on the left, it's receiving a name and it's setting up a server there. That's not possible. That breaks locality. And then you have on the right, you have these two related clients, one on Y first and the second on T. And actually, the first client is actually sending a pointer to the second client, right? So they are two related clients in a way. And these processes are not typable under the linear logic approach, right? There are many other processes, actually. So there you can actually come up with start pulling the trigger of many other things that are not typable. So in the linear logic approach, you cannot type a process that provides the same server twice, right? You can type that in Sangiorgi system, right? You cannot type a process that offers more than one server, and that has to do with this one name identified on the right that imposes a very strong environment on how things are typed. There are many other examples. Now I see Hugo standing up, so it means that I should wrap up.
I'm sorry.
It's fine.
No, it's interesting.
So
Interesting, actually.
there are many other examples, right? So, and actually, for space reasons, we didn't put this in the paper, but in the long version, we have this list of examples. So we have 8 processes which are representative things you cannot type under linear logic. So I would like just to wrap up by saying, okay, we have performed, I think, the first comparative study of type systems for pi calculus processes that enforce termination, right? So we have this unifying perspective based on session types, also based on termination as a guiding property for comparisons, right? We focus only on 3 type systems, but this was already quite an undertaking, right? So there are technical challenges because essentially these type systems are completely different. They come from different traditions. There are quite some difference between them. The takeaway message, if anything, so when it comes to termination, the class of processes induced by Curry-Howard is strictly weaker than the class of types of terminating processes induced by Deng and Sangiorgi's approach, right? So my way of interpreting that is like this very elegant control of clients and servers induced by linear logic because of the copying semantics of Bang is actually a bit implicit with respect to the more extension of the more intentional way of looking into termination that you have when you assign weights to names. Okay, that will be my lesson for the moment. Future work is actually not endless, but there are many other different type systems. Actually, what I have called here the Deng and Sangiorgi's approach is only one of the type systems that they propose in their paper. In their paper, they propose 4 different type systems of increasing difficulty and sophistication. Right? There is also this well-known paper by Yoshida, Bergen, and Honda, which actually is the first paper enforcing termination by typing. They use something completely different, which are called action type. They use logical relations. And there is also more recently in time, 2007, I guess, a type system, a hybrid type system by Kobayashi and Sangiorgi that enforces termination. And this is also very, very in line with the kind of things that we would like to compare. So this is where I will end. Thank you very much.
Now, we have time for a very short question.
So you have to go back to the slide. You define an encoding where you do the restriction of 2 names and you replace them by 1. So I think it's further back.
Yeah.
Yeah, here. So you have lots of information there in the 3rd case. I mean, you have both X and Y get replaced by Z.
Yeah, but that's because in the session type framework of Vasconcelos, you have this double binder, and then you have an X and a Y that are 2 endpoints of the same channel, right? So what we are doing here is simply flattening that into the usual restriction in which you have 1 binder. Right, so there is no loss of information, there is just a renaming being involved.
So if you go forward a few slides, yeah, one more, there.
Yeah.
If I replace X and Y by the same name, I have internal communication in this process.
Yeah, but we take care of not doing that.
But
so,
not by that definition that you gave.
Well, I mean, that definition is just an excerpt of the...
Okay.
So that all the proper conditions are in the paper.
Okay,
you don't want to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Just a very short. Okay, no, please.
This Frank has a question.
Yes, so in defense of the Curry-Howard approach, the way we actually use this, of course, is instead of replication, use it pervasively. We have recursive types. And when you have recursive types, of course, you have non-termination. So then there was a paper at FSCD last year where we show you can have what you call a weight-based type system on top of, actually, it's in order to guarantee termination again. And I assume that it would be comparable in some way to the system that you proposed there. But it's still interesting that you can get that kind of result, because even cut elimination for the linear case is non-elementary, so it's still not a trivial class, even though for practical programming purposes, it's not a very good class.
No, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because indeed, we actually explored different possibilities for comparison. There was also this system that you had at some point with Bernardo, with recursive type that ensure productivity, and actually that was a strong candidate to fit in our comparison. But indeed, there are other systems that you could have, and they mix in a way all these kind of different arguments for termination. It's interesting to hear, yes.
Thank you. Okay.
There was a...
I have a question. It is possible in the system of Sangiorgi to encode termination of lambda calculus, of simply type lambda calculus?
That's a tricky question, because when you say Sangiorgi type system, then you have, there are at least two different
Yes,
papers.
there are
There is
different
one
type
paper,
systems.
which I think this is not the one we're considering, in which they use as the main example the encoding of the lambda calculus. It's not the exact same type system that we're considering.
It's not the one that you are using.
Yes, it's in one that they prove termination using logical relations, not these weights.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's thank the
Thank you.